4 kilometers wide, 250 kilometers long. The most heavily fortified strip of land on Earth runs across the Korean Peninsula, like a scar that never fully closed, buried in razor wire and pressure mines, and 70 years of held breath. It is 3 in the morning, and nothing is moving. Nothing visible, anyway. North of that line, 10,000 artillery pieces sit in hardened positions, pre-aimed, crews at reduced readiness, but never fully asleep. South of it, a city of 10 million people sleeps. Its northern districts as close as 25 miles from those barrels, within range of guns that have been aimed at it for decades. The question military planners in Seoul and Washington and Beijing have run on whiteboards and in classified simulations for decades is simple and brutal. When the guns finally fire, how does this end? This is a thought experiment built from public sources and a reasonable amount of sleep deprivation. There are gaps in it, but it is the version that kept me thinking longest. The Korean Peninsula in the mid-2020s is not a frozen conflict. It is a compressed one. Kim Jong-un has tested intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of reaching the continental United States, overseen an estimated 40 to 60 nuclear warheads according to assessments from the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, and codified into law a nuclear use doctrine stating that any attempt to decapitate his regime triggers automatic nuclear response. That is not rhetoric. It is published policy. North Korea fields 1.2 million active military personnel, the 4th largest army on Earth, alongside a special operations force estimated at around 200,000 troops, trained specifically for infiltration and disruption behind enemy lines. They have spent 50 years digging. Tunnels under the DMZ, hardened artillery shelters carved into granite hillsides, underground facilities designed to survive everything short of a direct nuclear strike. The smell of that preparation is diesel fuel and cold concrete, the particular industrial odor of a military built not to win a modern war, but to survive one long enough to make it unwinnable for the other side. South Korea and the roughly 28,000 U.S. troops stationed there have spent the same 50 years building a counter. F-35 stealth fighters, Patriot and THAAD missile defense batteries, K-2 Black Panther tanks that are among the most capable main battle tanks currently fielded anywhere, a layered missile defense architecture called KAMD, a preemptive strike doctrine called kill chain, which is exactly what it sounds like. Detect a North Korean launch preparation, destroy it before it leaves the ground. The Combined Forces Command structure means South Korean and American forces operate as a single integrated machine, not two armies trying to coordinate. On paper, the coalition is overwhelming. On paper, it always has been. That is not the reason the guns have stayed quiet. Now imagine one night they do not. The opening move is not subtle. It never was going to be. North Korea's military doctrine for a peninsula war is built around speed, mass, and paralysis. Before dawn, the 170mm Koksan self-propelled guns, with a range of roughly 60 kilometers, enough to reach central Seoul from their current positions, open on the city's northern districts simultaneously with 300mm multiple rocket launcher salvos. 10,000 guns, firing even a fraction of their capacity, produces a volume of fire that is genuinely difficult to frame. At peak intensity, North Korean artillery could theoretically deliver more incoming rounds per hour than the entire daily peak at Stalingrad, against a metropolitan area of 10 million people, in the dark. The alert goes out on every South Korean cell phone at once. That sound, the emergency broadcast tone, is something Seoul residents have heard in drills so many times it has almost lost its meaning. Almost. A woman in an apartment in the Dobong district, the kind of northern neighborhood that appears first on targeting maps, grabs the bag she has kept packed since 2017. Her husband, a former ROK Army corporal, is already at the door. He does not need to read the message. He knows the sound of what comes next before it arrives. The first impacts are not heard so much as felt. a pressure wave that hits the chest and the stomach before the ears register anything, like the air itself briefly changed its mind about being air. Inside Camp Humphreys, 60 miles south of Seoul, the intelligence picture had been degrading for 72 hours. Not a surprise. Never a complete surprise. Officers are at stations before the third salvo. Counter-battery radar, systems designed to track incoming rounds backward to their source in seconds, is already painting targeting solutions. F-35 packages are wheels up in minutes. The question being asked in every command post is not whether South Korea can hit back. It is whether hitting back triggers the next threshold, because that calculus, not the artillery exchange itself, is where this war actually lives. North Korea's cyber units hit South Korean banking infrastructure and probe the power grid in the same opening window. Special operations teams attempt infiltration through tunnel complexes under the DMZ, 4 of which are confirmed, others suspected, each large enough to move a battalion of troops per hour. The conventional military picture is grim, but manageable. The coalition has trained for exactly this. But Kim is not trying to win a conventional war. He never was. Here's where it gets complicated. The US and South Korea win every conventional engagement. Every single one. North Korean armor is a generation behind. Its Air Force, aging MiG-29s and ancient F-7s, would be swept from the sky in hours against a fifth-generation coalition. Its surface navy is negligible. Within days of sustained air operations, the conventional military structure north of the DMZ would begin to collapse. That part is not close. But that is not actually the question on the table, because buried somewhere in those granite tunnels is a nuclear arsenal that nobody has a clean map of. The problem is not destroying North Korea's military. The problem is destroying it with certainty. And certainty is the only standard that matters when one surviving warhead changes the outcome from devastating to something without a name. There is also China. China shares a border with North Korea along the Yalu River, the same river American forces approached in 1950 before China entered the war and turned a near victory into a 3-year grinding deadlock. Chinese military doctrine has not forgotten that morning. Beijing's red line has been consistent for 70 years. No unified peninsula under American alliance. No U.S. forces at the Yalu. The moment South Korean and American troops begin moving north in force, China's calculus changes from observer to participant. Not loudly. Not with a declaration. With logistics. With intelligence. With the kind of support that extends a conflict indefinitely without ever appearing on a satellite image. The reunification question compounds everything. South Korea does not necessarily want rapid unification. Absorbing 25 million people from one of the most economically isolated societies on Earth would cost estimates ranging into the trillions. A burden that makes German reunification look like a municipal budget problem. The morning after the war is, in some ways, harder than the war itself. So how does this end? Most likely, the way it has almost ended before. Not with victory, not with defeat. With exhaustion and a ceasefire that looks almost identical to the armistice signed in 1953, except drawn over more rubble, and over a nuclear program that is now even less touchable than before, because using it as leverage in a crisis just proved its value to every government on Earth, watching from a distance and taking notes. The darker resolution, the one analysts will not publish but do discuss, is that Kim concludes he is losing and decides that the doctrine he wrote into law was not a bluff. One warhead, one city, and the post-war world is reorganized around a new fact that cannot be undismantled. Years later, a woman in a resettlement apartment in Incheon describes the night the alerts went off. She does not describe it in the language of geopolitics. She describes the weight of the bag she grabbed, the color of the emergency lights in the subway, the way the man next to her on the platform was reading something on his phone and did not look up for a long time, as if looking up would make it more real. South Koreans already carry a specific relationship with catastrophe held at arm's length. It is not fatalism. It is not indifference. It is the psychological architecture of a people who chose, every morning for 70 years, to build one of the most dynamic economies and cultures on Earth 40 miles from the most dangerous border in the world, and who understood, without needing to say it aloud, that the building itself was the act of defiance. In the DMZ, when the guns go quiet again, the cranes return. They nest there undisturbed because no human is permitted inside the buffer zone, and so the most militarized corridor on Earth became, accidentally, one of the most pristine wildlife sanctuaries on the continent. The red-crowned cranes land in the wire and do not appear to notice it. They have been flying over that line for 70 years without asking anyone's permission. Whatever happens below them, they will keep flying.